Wow, compost lovers, we made it to season 3. Thank you. That's 3 years of compost love being shared and celebrated. This season is going to be awesome. It will be as wide and varied as the microbes in our piles. We'll be talking with composters of all scales, new technologies, legislation, science, and some about the second compost operation, my farm, Earth Care Farm, is opening up in the neighboring state of Connecticut. There are so many ways to make compost, diverse materials, and varied scales of operation. We need it all. Let's talk about all of it. Can you feel the momentum gaining? I can. Speaking of diverse ingredients, what an honor to kick off the first episode of Season 3 with Katrina Spade of Recompose. Recompose specializes in human composting. Yes, we are starting this season with human composting. Such a fascinating niche in our industry. Katrina talks about the incredibly thoughtful design process Recompose uses to help connect the general public to the reverence of composting. This is a deep, caring process, fully honoring the life of the one who passed and the loved ones left behind. Human composting isn't legal in all states yet, so you'll hear how Katrina helped get that legalized in Washington in 2019. It's now legal in 7 states, but so far only happening in Washington and Colorado. In my state of Rhode Island, it hasn't passed yet, but seems like it will soon. Join me in this rich conversation with Katrina Spade. Welcome to The Composter, a podcast for compost lovers. I'm your host and fellow composter, Jane Murner. Join me in practical conversation between industry professionals and farmers with a passion for producing quality compost. We're going to dig deep into the science, technology, and art of compost production so that we as composters can help enliven the world's soils. This episode of The Composter is brought to you by Viably. As the master distributor of Comtech products in North America, Viably helps their customers to uncover the most forward-thinking solutions in the waste and recycling industry, including the proven 4-step Comtech compost process of shred, turn, screen, and separate, which produces healthy, contaminant-free compost while optimizing commercial production efficiency. Viably is also the distributor of the Turbo Separator food waste depackaging system and the HARP Renewables biodigester. Both of these revolutionary machines can help composters incorporate food scraps into their compost process, creating a more nutritious end product and the opportunity for an enhanced bottom line. You can learn more about Viably and their portfolio of compost solutions at thinkviably.com. While there, request a complimentary consultative meeting to discover how Viably can help your compost operation deliver what is possible. Enjoy the show. Katrina, welcome to The Composter. So nice to have you on today.
Thank you. It's nice to be on.
This is going to be a fascinating conversation. It's the first time we've talked to someone in your little niche of our industry. So can you tell us a bit about yourself and how you got involved in human composting and what inspired you to start Recompose?
I would love to. I think it's best to go back a long time ago to my childhood in rural New Hampshire. My parents were both in medicine, but they also gardened extensively. And they considered composting, and still do consider composting, to be absolutely critical, beautiful, and useful, practical when you're a gardener. So I grew up just thinking of composting generally as something you definitely do. You would never, for example, give away your kitchen scraps if you could keep them on your own property. And at the same time, I think the fact that they were both in medicine and had patients who died gave me an overall appreciation of mortality and its existence, and the fact that it's okay to talk about that sort of thing. So if I go way back, those are the two underpinnings for me getting here. But then about 30 years later, I went to a wonderful school called Yestermorrow Design Build School in Vermont. And I took a permaculture certification course there, and that really deepened my appreciation of decomposition, composting, and, really working with nature to get things done.
I love it so much.
um, and then after yestermorrow, the other thing that school did for me was give me kind of confidence to pursue design as a career instead of just as a hobby. And I then went to grad school for architecture, but went into architecture with all the underpinnings of, okay, permaculture, decomposition, scrutiny against and around the building trades and the building industry. So I'm really grateful that I had that as a foundation to go back to school for architecture. And while I was in graduate school, I started looking at the funeral industry. It is, by the way, for anyone out there who wants to take a look, a fascinating industry with a really kind of history that combines, financial sort of capitalistic needs and desires with a cultural discomfort of looking at mortality and death. And, so over the years, especially in the American funeral industry, we've really given over the process of the care of our loved ones' bodies and our funeral care. We've given it over entirely to professionals in a lot of cases. And I became pretty obsessed with that whole concept, and then the what we do with our bodies. Why do we only have cremation and conventional burial on offer? And so all of that, was really laid this foundation for me to develop and bring to market human composting.
I feel really fortunate to have met your mom this summer. Actually, just as an aside, she came on a compost tour of our farm, and you could just see that spark of, she gets that whole process of life and birth and life and death and life and how that continues on, just with her questions she was asking, and that seed of that runs through all of that. And amazing that has sparked you. I like watching her and then hearing you speak about it is like, okay, I get it. I get what's going on, and all the facets you have to put together to put into this. It's amazing. It seems very serendipitous that you came here now to do this. Can you explain the process Recompose uses for human composting? And really, you don't have to hold back because we have experienced composters that are listening in, and we'll understand you, and we're not grossed out at all. We're into this.
Absolutely. I won't hold back. The moment of clarity and the sort of design inspiration that happened to me in grad school. Again, I was in architecture, thinking about buildings, but also thinking about the systems humans have created, broadly speaking, and looking at the funeral industry. And I just knew I didn't want to be cremated or buried. And so I was kind of like, from a design lens, what else is out there? What could be out there? And I also knew that I think nature is an important player in all of life and death and grief. And then I also happen to be a person that loves to live in cities. And so I had all of this was sort of overlaid with an urban lens. Like, okay, if you have natural burial where your body's placed directly in the ground, what a perfect solution in a lot of ways is shoeing, embalming, and concrete grave liners. I love that process, but it's really meant for rural settings where there's lots of land, because you still need land to bury people. And so I was like, well, what's the urban equivalent to that? What would be the way to return to nature after you die, but in our cities? And right around that time when I was thinking through all this, my friend Kate called and said, hey, have you heard of the process of livestock mortality composting, where you can compost a whole cow or a whole horse? And I was like, what? No, I have not heard of that. But obviously, if you can compost a cow, there's no reason you couldn't compost a human being. So that was real, like a light bulb moment for me, where I was like, okay, that makes so much sense. It's already, the process exists in agricultural settings. I've later found out, as you know, that it's really well researched and has been proven to be really great at reducing pathogen load. And it's like safe and effective. And again, proven over and over in research studies and in academic settings. And I immediately said, great, well, I'm going to work on a project to compost human beings. And from the beginning, it was a mix, a combination of and it's always been this, right? How do we do this very physical analog process? So all the engineering and technicality that needs to go with it. And how do we create something that is meaningful for human beings? Because we're not farm animals. And so from the beginning, it's been this joining of this process that I think is deeply reverent, composting. And I bet most of your listeners also think it's deeply reverent. And then, but also acknowledging that there's it's not obviously deeply reverent for every person that hears about it. And so really thinking about how to use design to make approachable this idea. And so that's been the journey for the last 10 years or so.
So is the design there, is it like in vessel, aerated wood chips and bodies, or can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so we do use an in-vessel system. We designed our own in-vessel composting system that addressed things like how to load a human body in an elegant way versus a non-farm in-vessel system may be less concerned with how to load animal carcasses. So we looked at the design from a number of aspects that are different from on-farm mortality composting. Like one is how to load the body. Another was we're building our facilities in urban centers, right in the middle of the city is the goal. And so that's very different than on a farm where you might have some space. You could have a few composters. You could have windrows even. You likely have more space to work with. So we designed our vessels so that they stack vertically, so that if you're looking at an array of Recompose composting vessels, they are they have a hexagonal framework and then cylindrical vessels nestled in that hexagonal framework. And that's another piece where we were looking at okay, we could do rectilinear, racking, or we could go hexagonal, which then has this added benefit of making you think of nature because it's like a beehive.
Exactly what I was picturing, a beehive.
Yeah. It's an aerated in-vessel system. Each vessel rotates. We typically rotate our vessels about once a week, very slowly. Actually, the speed was another piece where we're like, well, even if fast is better, and it's debatable whether it is, but even if fast was better for rotation, what's important to us includes how you imagine what's happening inside. Mm-hmm. And so we actually rotate our vessels very slowly, in part because we felt that was important for that human aspect.
I love that. I have the same, even with my own compost pile. I think I like a slow turning process rather than those fast windrow turners. I think of the same thing. There's all that life in there, and it just seems like too violent to go so fast.
Yeah, just go a little gentle.
Just be gentle. Yeah, that's a beautiful way that you thought about that design.
The other thing that was really fascinating for us when we started piloting was I worked with one of the experts in mortality composting, Dr. Lynn Carpenter-Boggs out of Washington State University. And she and I immediately thought about the feedstock and okay, well, let's see here. What are most farmers using for mortality composting? Wood chips, probably farm bedding, barn bedding, manure is definitely in there usually. And we were like, that will not fly.
Nope.
We're not going to be composting humans in manure. So we use a mixture of wood chips, alfalfa, and straw, and it works beautifully for our purposes. But it was really fun in early days to be like, we want it to look great, we want it to smell great, and we want it to work great. Mm-hmm. So, but different than when you were thinking on farms again.
I can just picture that little bed of cozy carbon materials,
Yeah.
that you nestle into. Okay, that's great. And how long does it take? How long does that process take?
Yeah, so that's another difference if in comparing human composting with livestock mortality composting. Again, on farms, you probably aren't in a huge rush to compost that cow or the horse. Or that's been my assumption on farms. But at Recompose, because we only have so many vessels, and by the way, we have 34 vessels in our Seattle facility, and each one gets one person in it at a time. We wanted to keep the time frame, the in-vessel time frame, as short as possible, with still making beautiful compost. So right now we are averaging about 30 to 40 days in vessel, which is pretty quick. And that breaks down everything really beautifully except for the bone, which our team then sorts the bone out of the compost, also sorts for non-organics. Like if you have a titanium hip or something else that's non-organic, we sort that out and recycle it at that point. And then we reduce the bone mechanically into like a fine, kind of a sand-like substance. And then bone and reduced bone and compost get reincorporated, and they go into what we call a cure bin to cure for another, usually it's 3 to 5 weeks. So the whole process is 2 to 3 months for us.
And do most people take the compost with them afterwards, or do most people want to donate it? What are people doing with their loved ones' compost?
I used to go to I still do. I'll go to like an elder care facility and talk with folks about what I was working on. But before it was legal, before we'd finished the design, all of that. And I would explain the why of, like, this is an alternative to cremation and burial. And I had a lot of seniors that were like big fans of the idea. But one of them at the end of a talk, I remember Linda, she raised her hand and she said, "Katrina, my family does not want a cubic yard of compost after I die. So you need to figure out something to do with it." And because that's what we're creating, about a cubic yard per person. And so we have relationships now with land partners. So these are organizations that own land and are conserving it, and typically also working to rejuvenate it in different ways. And families can donate their compost to those projects. So we facilitate that. And about half of our families choose to come to our facility and get the whole cubic yard. And the other half is donating it. Usually they're taking a small amount, like a little box of it, and then donating the rest.
I love it. I love this whole concept. Can you talk about the environmental impact of composting compared with cremation or burial?
I can. So cremation and burial, I think it's pretty interesting that they both have a very similar carbon footprint. So because cremation, of course, is burning fossil fuels, typically fossil gas, to burn a body. And then with conventional burial, you have the manufacture and transport of casket, headstone. Then almost all burials these days have a concrete grave liner, like a concrete box that the casket sits in. All of that is buried in the ground, and then you have the upkeep and mowing of the cemetery afterwards. So both of them, and then, burial takes a lot of land, which we don't have, especially in cities. And then for me, there was always the piece of like, it just felt a little wasteful to cremate my body if I have something left at the end. So with all of that, composting, of course, avoids those emissions. We have very small inputs with a basic fan system for our vessels and the rotation system. But if it avoids the carbon emissions of cremation and burial, and then on top of that has a great deal of carbon sequestration that's happening through the wood chips in the body and the carbon materials into the soil, into the ground, or onto the ground, and where we want it. So we did a life cycle assessment about 4 years ago, and found we're saving just over a metric ton of carbon per person who chooses to be composted instead of buried or cremated.
That's amazing. That's so awesome.
Yeah. And, we think we're probably undercounting it and so we're going to be doing a new one. What we didn't take into account, or what isn't calculated there, is the benefit to the land that you put the compost on. Mm-hmm. So, and we've just been refining our systems over the years. So we'll be doing another assessment at some point.
I bet it's twice that amount.
You think so?
Yeah. With that compost and going back into the ground, all that organic matter, and then all the life that thrives off that, and the fungal hyphae that can pull the carbon from the atmosphere. It's like a hard thing to calculate, but it will be fun to do. Plastic is a huge problem in the compost industry. The OSC Pack Pact is a collective action campaign that works to reduce single-use packaging in the natural products industry. We inspire innovators to minimize waste while raising consciousness about the environmental impact of our choices. We empower brands, packaging manufacturers, and consumers to take action. When you take the Pack Pact, you pledge to make progress around circular packaging. You'll also receive a discount code to shop select products from leading natural products brands that you love. Click the link in the show notes to join the Pack Pact. Compost use and selection decisions involve many factors and are not one size fits all. The U.S. Composting Council's Seal of Testing Assurance, STA, program helps you make the best decisions for your application. Learn about the 3 C's of the STA program: clarity, consistency, and confidence. Learn more and enroll at www.compostingcouncil.org/STA. And now, back to the show. So I assume you have a lot of extra legal and regulatory challenges you face than just a compost facility like mine, which already has a lot.
Yeah, no, I know some of what you have going on. Yeah. So let's see. In 2017, I founded Recompose to try to bring this idea to life and really make it happen. And one of the first things that happened was a friend, a law professor, wrote me an email, and she was like, "Katrina, I really like what you're trying to do." She's always been critical of the funeral industry and knows a lot about all those laws and regulations. She said, "I love what you're trying to do, but I think you should know it's illegal." I was like, okay. So she and I worked together to figure out a strategy, and we realized pretty early on that we really needed to change statute to allow composting alongside cremation and burial. And so, interestingly, all funeral law is state by state. So every state is a little bit different, but most states outline what you can do with a human body. After death, you can cremate, you can bury, you can donate to science. And so here in Washington State, we proposed an addition to the statute that would allow human composting. We brought little baggies down to Olympia, to the Capitol building. On the one baggie was wood chips, alfalfa, and straw, and in the other baggie was cow compost. And we would show representatives and senators. We had about 15 seconds with each one. It was very, very quick. But we'd be like, "This is the before and this is the after. We're looking to create, an alternative that is sustainable and is one more choice that you have when someone dies." And we actually had that law pass in its first session in 2019. Mm-hmm. And it went into effect in 2020, which is when we opened our first facility. But in terms of the regulation, so that's the statute, and that's very exciting when the law passes. And by the way, human composting is now legal in 7 states and counting. But yes, great. But regulatorily speaking, we are bound by basically a couple of agencies. One is in Washington State. I'll stick with that one. The Department of Licensing regulates funeral care. So we follow, of course, all the funeral regulations, and some of those around human composting I helped write after we passed the law. And then the Board of Health also weighs in, or the departments of health in different states. And then in Washington, compost facilities are regulated by, among others, the Puget Sound Clean Air Agency. So I think we're one of the only states where the agency is regulating odor as well as any off-gassing outputs. So we had an extensive permitting process with that agency as well. And it's funny because in some cases we're a funeral home, in some cases we're a human composting facility, also known as natural organic reduction. That's the formal term. And then in some cases we're a composting facility, just depending on the agency.
Okay. Is that all of them?
I think so.
Okay. You don't want to find out about it anymore.
Right. Yeah. I hope that's it.
Yeah.
But as a total side note in the weeds, the Department of Ecology out here is very knowledgeable about livestock mortality composting and has written a lot of guidelines for farmers and that sort of thing. And they were very helpful and definitely allies in our work, but they made it clear from the beginning that they didn't think that the whole thing should be regulated as compost because compost was waste, or they said compost is considered to be waste, and they didn't want human bodies to be considered to be waste. So they stepped aside as a regulatory agency formally.
Okay. I don't think any of it should be considered waste.
I mean,
regular compost either. It drives me nuts. Yeah, but it's all such a valuable resource. This is fascinating. I'm loving this conversation. Okay, so I'm sure that there's been ethical concerns or cultural differences that have arisen in this field. And are there cultures that already do this? And how do you address these things? That's a big, broad question.
There is no one else. There are no countries where composting happens that I've found. So we're the first. The first was Washington State. Now happens there's only operators in 2 states that I know of, Washington and Colorado right now. I suspect there's lots of, fermenting new organizations and companies coming up. But in a lot of cultures, natural burial is practiced. That's where a body is placed either in a shroud or a pine box and then directly in the ground. And sometimes, especially in the US, that is connected with conservation land. So conservation burial, where when you place a body in the ground, you've made it legally protected in a way. And so you combine that with conservation work and plant only native species and work on regenerating that particular land. And often there's not even headstones. It's really about being part of nature. So that's practiced in many parts of the world, but I'm pretty certain that human composting started here.
And so have there been groups that are opposing it because of cultural differences or kind of ethics of it?
The main opposer is the Catholic Church.
Okay.
And they've been officially and formally opposed in each state where we've brought or seen legislation. And they do talk about respect of the body. And I find it, I mean, I just like full out don't agree because I think it's the most reverent thing you could do. So, but I will say that the Catholic Church's opposition has been really light. Like it's been formal, but not very fiery. And they took a long, long time to accept cremation and to bless it, if you will. So we've also composted a number of Catholics, and we've had priests bless the body before, and we've had priests bless the soil we've created, that compost, afterwards. So on an individual level, we're not seeing as much opposition. It's really a choice for people to make.
Things are slow to change in the Catholic Church, but they will. So
exactly.
They'll be seizing it in about 1,000 years from now. It'd be great. Okay, and how has the public's response been to Recompose?
I think the public in general is energized and inspired by the idea. There's there's always the kind of question of of relying on the phrase composting purely because it gets people right to kitchen waste and scraps. Like it's really, they immediately go banana peels and coffee grounds, most people. But It's just an accurate term. And I think it's such a beautiful process that, for better or for worse, we continue to lean on it because accuracy is really important. And most people, certainly when they hear about like the feedstock we use, they're like, oh. And yeah, I mean, we have love letters written to our company about the process, about like giving people comfort and peace and knowing that they could have this when they die. So there's a really like pretty amazing groundswell of like love for the idea. And then there's all the education that has to come with it for everyone else who's not there yet. But I think also once people realize this is up to you to choose, then it's not a threat to anybody, except it's a threat to the status quo a little bit, but it's not a threat to any particular person.
I feel like my job is to support you with the public's view, and I would love to get people's opinions about all types of composting to be reverent and beautiful, and none of it be about waste. All of it be about respect for life. So I'll be your champion.
Awesome.
Do you have any personal stories or experiences that have deeply impacted your drive to continue in this industry? And I'm just going to add an aside that I was just at a conference and I met somebody from Hawaii whose father passed away in 2020, and they used Recompose for his father's burial. And he said it was just a moving experience during a very hard time of their lives. And he was so thrilled to have some of his, compost with his dad. It brought it that full circle back. So I just heard this personal story a couple days ago. I feel like it was amazing, but you must have so many of those.
I mean, it's really an honor to be able to offer something that will maybe help. Like when we're talking about grief and the loss of somebody, how you care for their body matters very much, but it doesn't solve the grief or make the loss any easier. So it's an interesting place to be where we consider our role to be, well, number one, to offer this service, and then number two, to be very clear and open about what the process entails, like what the benefits are, and then let it speak for itself, kind of, if that makes sense. It's been really cool to see ritual be created in response to composting. So, for example, about 2 to 3 months later, your family and friends have this compost to use on their gardens. One of my favorite stories is this person named Wayne died. He was an avid gardener. He lived in Seattle. And his sister Marie, his body was brought to Recompose, and we composted his body. And then 2 months later, his sister Marie came to Recompose with a trailer. We give instructions on the size of trailer or pickup truck you need. And she met the team that had tended her brother's body through this transformation. And they helped her load the trailer with his compost. And she drove it back to the neighborhood where he lived in Seattle. And all of his neighbors came with their 5-gallon buckets, and they got some of Wayne's soil and they brought it back to their gardens. And the idea that, like, on a fall day, they're gardening with Wayne still, even though he's died, is really special.
And he's always part of those gardens. It doesn't
exactly.
End.
Yeah, exactly. Those are the stories. Yeah.
Is there anything else that you want our listeners to know? Like, are you going to be opening another one of these? Is this going to be is there going to be a phenomena? Is this a one-off, you think? What's going to happen? And anything you want us to know, really. What do you want to talk about?
Well, we opened Seattle after we opened a pilot facility. We opened Seattle, which is sort of like our full-scale public welcome. We can host clients and have services there. We opened that facility in June of 2022. And it's the dream, and we think of it as a model for what we hope will spread. And one of the ways we're doing that is through licensing partnerships with others. And so what this looks like is, of course, it needs to be legal in the place. And that is a barrier for sure and can take some time. But once legalization and regulation have happened, we're looking to partner with folks and organizations that want to open Recompose facilities or something like a Recompose facility with Recompose equipment and technology and process behind it. So we've developed out this system. It's taken many years to get it right. And then it comes with, there's the vessel system, but then it comes with all of the ancillary equipment like the feedstock mixing, the bone reducer, the sorting and screening systems, all of that together, plus like the process control system that we've developed to go with it. So we're really proud of this equipment we've developed, and we're also really proud of the brand we're creating around Recompose. So I guess what I'm excited about right now is as we're finding these partners who may be a fit for, we'll be a fit for each other. They're able to access capital. They're like ready to open a place and offer this service to clients. That is really cool because it to me, it says, okay, we succeeded in what we were trying to do, which is to make this available and create a model for it around the world.
You've made a good design.
We made a good design.
Yeah, worthy of replication. Oh, that's awesome. Okay, I hope that we see at least one in every state soon. I did see it's been in Rhode Island. I've seen whisperings of it up in the state house. I know that they've been talking about passing it. I don't know if it's passed yet.
I think it might. I think I got an update there. I'm not sure if it got just pushed to next session, but a lot of times it just takes a year or 2 or 3 years to kind of get through. Yeah.
I might have to bring up some compost and some wood chips.
Perfect.
Meet for 15 seconds with all the senators. All right, great. Well, thank you so much. This has been amazing. It's such a rich conversation. And I appreciate you so much for taking the time. And
no, it's great to talk with you. Thank you.
All right, we'll talk to you soon, Katrina. Okay, wasn't that amazing? Sign me up. If you'd like to learn more about Katrina Spade and Recompose, visit recompose.life. So much gratitude to Katrina for being a pioneer in this niche, to No-Till Growers for generously producing this podcast, and to Soul Shop for providing the music in the intro. Check them out at soulshot.net, and infinite appreciation for all of you compost-loving listeners out there.